Great. So the code for the Menti, you can go to menti.com and then type in the code. It's 59611297. Um, and I'll also type it in the chat. Um, if you'd like to share any questions you might have, we'll glance at it. But mostly we wanted to just chat with you all. I know that I tend to find these professional development type sessions really helpful. I know I did back when I was getting my PhD, and now I think they're a little bit more common, which is nice. Though, of course, I think getting academic positions is much more competitive too. So, but I hope that we can be helpful. We just thought we would shed light on what our experiences have been working at a primarily undergraduate institution. And I'm glad you got to hear a little bit about some of the research that we've done at Cal Poly. But essentially what we were planning to talk about today is positions at PUIs. So we'll start a little bit with our background, our motivation for choosing a PUI, some of the pleasant and less pleasant aspects of these jobs, mostly relative to R1 positions, a day in our life, so kind of what our typical day looks like, the application and interview process, and how to just tips for maintaining an active research lab. And then finally, at the end, if anyone's interested, I was really impressed with that ChatGPT summary that even included my year as interim associate dean of diversity and curriculum. But I do a lot of admin type work, so figured I could chat about what that has been like, or if anyone has questions about, potential pros and cons. So really quickly, a little bit about me. I grew up in Arizona. I went to Middlebury College for undergrad, where I studied psychology and Spanish, and I did a minor in education. I always knew that I wanted to teach from far back before college, but it was really kind of figuring out what level I wanted to teach, what subject. I then did a master's at Harvard in mind, brain, and education as sort of a deferral year. So I was really grateful that Elizabeth allowed me to get an early start in the lab and work on various research projects, even starting the summer before, and go to lab meetings during that year that I was at Harvard. And then I did my PhD in psychology at Boston College, where I received a cognitive neuroscience concentration and primarily studied sleep, stress, and emotional memory. And then I started my position as an assistant professor at Cal Poly straight from my PhD, which I think is a little more atypical now, but I remember talking to Elizabeth about it, but it was the position I wanted. I remember thinking about deferring to do a postdoc, and Elizabeth saying, why defer to do a postdoc if you already have your dream position? Like, you usually do a postdoc to get the position that you want. So that's a little bit about me. And then I mentioned this briefly, but last year I was the interim associate dean for diversity and curriculum. So I'm happy to touch on that as well.
I thought you were just going to talk about me.
Oh,
but
well.
yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin. I went to a small liberal arts school called Lawrence, and I did a PhD in neuroscience from Northwestern, where I studied sleep and memory with Ken Paller. And then I did 2 postdocs. I did a postdoc at Princeton for about 5 years, working on some sleep and memory stuff, and that's where I started some of the naturalistic neuroimaging work. At UC Davis, I continued doing more naturalistic neuroimaging, as well as some of the computational modeling that we talked about briefly in the talk. And I began at Cal Poly in 2022 as well. I guess we're gonna go into the search
Yeah, we'll
stuff a
share
little
more.
more. Okay, cool.
Motivation. But just for terminology, looking at what kind of institutions are out there, we have the R1 universities, which are doctoral granting institutions, which are technically classified as very high research activity. We have the R2s and R3s, where you're seeing a little bit less research activity, and then the PUIs, which were mostly focused primarily undergraduate institutions, which award very few, if any, PhDs. So Cal Poly is a master's level institution. There are several master's programs, but no PhDs. So you might have master's universities, baccalaureate universities that will be 4-year institutions. You have SLACs, which is a common acronym that you might hear, selective liberal arts colleges. And then you also have associate level universities or community colleges. So, if thinking about, or just sharing a little bit more about what our motivation was for teaching at a PUI, I've bolded the ones that are common to us both, where from very early on, we wanted to become educators. Dr. Antony's parents are both educators. My mom ran a daycare growing up, and I always enjoyed getting to teach the little kids things as I grew up. And we both wanted to be at an institution that truly valued teaching, as opposed to some places where you might feel like it's the second thought, or like very secondary in some cases to research. And I think, just as far as if that would have made me happy, I don't think it would have been as strong a fit, where somewhere where I felt like I could delve into, continued professional development about teaching. I wanted that sort of time and those choices to be valued, and for it not to feel like, I was wasting my time teaching, or that my evals were good enough. Don't worry about those sorts of things. And then the bottom ones are more specific to me. I had an amazing time in graduate school, but I didn't think that I wanted to supervise my own PhD students or postdocs. I didn't necessarily want to spend a lot of time writing grants, or more so have the pressure to feel like if I didn't get a grant funded, that I wouldn't be able to, fund my small business, or that I would need to fire a postdoc or something like that. And then I couldn't see many downsides. It was important to me that finding a teaching load that was that I could find a teaching load that was manageable. I certainly didn't want to be somewhere where I thought it would be impossible to do research. So those are just some of the motivations. Do you want to add anything to that?
Um, sure, yeah, so I guess I did search for our own jobs a couple times. We were trying to land kind of near each other within California, so there were somewhat selective searches for the most part. But I also really, I went to a selective liberal arts school. I really kind of valued the teaching process as well. And as Kelly said, both my parents were educators, so I feel like it's kind of in my blood. So yeah, I was a little more flexible which type of institution. But yeah, some of these certainly apply to me as well.
Great. Wonderful. So I'll read the questions aloud just so that both of us can kind of frame the rest of it. So there's a question, what research instruments other than behavioral and online studies are you able to use at teaching focused institutes? Are fMRI studies feasible with appropriate funding? There's one, and we'll certainly
Should we do them? Yeah.
yeah. Um, that one I think will come up later with kind of what to look for. My current career goal is physician scientist, DO/PhD. How do you prepare for teaching demonstrations, and what do you look for in an institution? What do you perceive as the biggest benefits of teaching and researching at a PUI? What are the greatest challenges to doing research at a PUI? And then what is the best source of research funding at PUIs in our experience? Great.
It's a
Those
lot
are
of,
really
yeah.
amazing questions.
Yeah.
Um,
Many of which will be
yeah, I think
addressed.
many
Yeah.
of them are kind of interspersed throughout, but we'll make sure
Do you
to.
have to be outed? Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Well, we'll kind of go through some of this quickly so we can spend more time on the questions, and I'll just display this all at once in case that's helpful for anyone looking at this slide. So, sort of a pleasant surprise for us at Cal Poly, our teaching load is very reasonable. We actually get some teaching credit to supervise research interns, which is part of why we have such a robust research lab. So having 12 students in our lab counts as a course release every quarter. So we're able to have lab meetings and have that count as a class, along with supervising a variety of projects. We have lots of opportunities for course releases. So I mentioned supervising students, but also if there are significant service roles that you have, like I run an undergraduate research mentorship program that Tony mentioned, called Beacon. And for that, I get a course release each quarter. So there are a variety of things like that. We have really exceptional internal grant funding that is not very competitive. And it's largely because I think Cal Poly is trying to figure out, what are we becoming? What are our goals? There are a lot of more senior faculty who are more attracted to it. When there was a lower research expectation, they didn't want to do research. And now Cal Poly is really focusing on the teacher scholar model and increasing sources of internal funding. So to the question about funding, I'd say, there are some really great grant programs that are geared specifically towards the smaller institutions. So like the NIH area grant and the NSF, is it the RUI grant? Are two really good ones that you have to be at a certain school, like a PUI, in order to qualify for those. And then we also have a lot of internal grant funding. At Cal Poly, we have a relatively underutilized subject pool. I think that also stems from we're able to do research with undergraduates using the intro psychology participants. We don't do studies where we're utilizing a lot of families or children and things like that. One perk, I think, and this speaks to one of the questions, we have our summers completely off. So we can teach over the summer if we want additional salary, but there's no need to be tethered to a specific place. And I think what's been really pleasant quality of life wise, even though we do spend a lot of time doing research, is this sense of intrinsic motivation that we don't need to be doing research. And that I think adds to just a nice quality of life. Certainly, there are less pleasant things. It is definitely not as rich of a research environment. So it's harder to find people to collaborate who are doing similar things. We don't have postdocs or PhD students. So a lot of times we have just tons of data, but there isn't, we can't analyze or write it up quickly enough.
The type of like talk series you have, you must like go to multiple talks a week here. There's just not that, there aren't people swinging through all the time doing that kind of stuff. So you kind of have to take advantage of conferences a little more for keeping up with things. So yeah, that's like not the same type of environment.
Yeah, and I think I'll speak to the, what types of research are possible. So we've kept up, and this is on a later slide, we've kept up a lot of collaborations. So James is doing a lot of research at Davis where he's scanning. We're both on, he's PI on an NSF cognitive neuroscience grant. So that has enabled us to keep up with fMRI research. There are hospitals that we could collaborate with, but we know that we'll never have access to our own scanner. We do have an EEG system and a dedicated sleep lab. So doing those types of studies has been really rewarding, even for us, and training our students. But again, there are challenges with like turnover of students graduating relatively quickly.
Yeah, we ran like little workshops to learn EEG and analysis the last 2 years. So we think with that it was like kind of enough to get like a core group of undergrads like able to, and like start to tackle certain parts of the analysis as well. With the fMRI stuff, I think like you between open data sets and possible collaborations, like I think that's often going to be something that one can do if you either like if you want to, or you like ask enough, or you find collaborators. The biggest bottleneck is going to be the time to analyze it, because those are large complicated data sets, as many of you know. And so you can either work on it in your summers, or your spare time. But, you know, it's like oftentimes with those large fMRI projects, you know, it takes people who are working on only that several years to publish or something. So that can kind of prolong things. So honestly, I think that's the biggest bottleneck, because there is a lot of open data out there by now. And one other thing that we have an eye tracking system too. So that's within the kind of expense that one of your startups, if you were at a PUI, might be able to cover that in the EEG system. So yeah, those are possible.
Great. I think just one other benefit, speaking to the question of what are some of the biggest benefits, I think the lack of pressure, I think, to obtain grants is a big one. But then also in this climate, unfortunately, I think not having that pressure is especially nice. So just knowing that, and I think this speaks to just making sure that you're at a place where the research expectations are in line with what your typical job looks like. So, ensuring when you're looking at job ads that if there's an extremely high teaching load, make sure that whatever number of publications you might need, or if you need to apply for grants, that might be fine, but ensuring that there isn't an expectation to receive an external grant if you also have an exceptionally high teaching load. But I think one of the benefits, for me, a really big one is this kind of intrinsic motivation of knowing that the research that we do is highly valued, but it's not required. Just very quickly, what a typical day in my life looks like. I didn't actually track all of this, so maybe it is not exactly what you see here, but my best guess, I do spend a lot of time now with more like admin-like work, being the associate director of our honors program and running that research mentorship program. But because of the release time associated with that, I don't spend too much time teaching, which sometimes I find ironic because that's what drew me to this type of position. But I do feel like there's a really nice balance between teaching, research, meetings, other service or admin work. And then James's looks a little bit different.
Also don't know how accurate this is, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I do. I think we've both like kind of really enjoyed that we can kind of pave our way through, like, Kelly emphasizing more service and me more research. And that you can still kind of do these jobs and treat them in a way that, yeah, I don't know, that you can like emphasize the thing you want. And anytime, there have been terms that we've taught more too. So that's like, that can be especially fun thing, or when you're developing a new class, definitely the teaching aspect goes up as well. So.
Is it 2 per quarter? Like what's your schedule? Like is it like
2 per quarter?
is
Yeah.
it like semesters essentially?
We're about to switch to semesters actually, so that's its own thing. But yeah, we're on quarters at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so like 4 quarters across the year.
Well,
With summer off, so
summer.
3.
Yeah. Well, trimesters.
Yeah, so that's the typical one, like a 2-2-2. I'm starting my 10th year. I've never actually taught 2 classes yet. I've only had either like 1-1-1 or sometimes less than that. I think that's because I do a lot of service that I haven't done that. But yeah, I think we are fortunate to have new faculty release time and such to keep the teaching load feeling where it's very enjoyable and that we're not teaching more than one class. We'll go through this pretty quickly. I also intend to share the slides and would be happy to talk with anyone later. I really like kind of helping brainstorm and yeah, all parts of the application process. But again, I'll just display all of these at once. So as far as what it might require to be competitive for one of these positions, I think many schools will look for some sort of teaching experience. So even if you can't get that during a PhD or a postdoc, I think there are great opportunities to find guest lecturing opportunities. And I would encourage you, if you find those guest lecturing opportunities, to collect some sort of assessment. So you might be able to just collect some qualitative comments from students or some quick quantitative feedback so that you can include that potentially in your teaching statement, or just being really upfront about seeking those opportunities, or not being allowed to teach your own class, but here are all the ways that I'm demonstrating my desire to be at this type of position. I think the biggest thing, and I have this on a slide later on, is to not make it seem like being at a teaching focused institution is your second choice. That's something that, being on a number of search committees, if it feels like, oh, these were all written for R1 positions and we're clearly the backup, that immediately makes people less likely to want to interview you. So and even in encouraging your letter writers and making sure they know the difference between, this is a school where you won't have PhD students, so they're not writing their whole letter about how, incredible of a mentor so-and-so will be for PhD students.
I think even another way to put that is like, it might be, it's like, obviously there's a lot of people, and if someone has a great research record, that's great. We're looking for people who have great research. I think it's more like, make sure that teaching isn't like kind of an afterthought, or like that, like, oh, I guess I should try, like, apply to these schools too. And then you haven't thought about these parts of the position. Because yeah, I think it's actually, I don't know, I think it's okay if it's your second choice, if it seems like it is a choice you want. And so that, I don't know, does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
It's perfectly fine if it's
Yeah.
the second choice, but it shouldn't read necessarily as, this is my backup, or I perceive this to be easier.
Or like, I just thought like a week ago that maybe I would like to teach, and so I don't have like I haven't sought out the opportunities to show that, I guess.
I think, depending on the school, talking about your experience mentoring undergraduate students can be really key. So, if you've had that experience, I would talk about it. Being able to demonstrate that you can do your research at that institution is really key. So I remember, even though I had published with fMRI, I talked about, why my research program is suitable to a school without a scanner, and what would I do, including like open data sets, collaborations, but also I can do this other line of work with EEG and eye tracking and more affordable methodologies. And then, yeah, I think schools really vary based on how much they care about service or diversity, equity, and inclusion. In our department, that is very, very important. So I think just having all those materials ready and having multiple people look at them, including people at similar types of schools, is really important. What to look for in job ads. I think the biggest one is the teaching load. So think about, is whatever teaching load you're required to have manageable for what your goals are? And even thinking about, the size of the department. So at some really small departments, you might be asked to teach a course in developmental psychology when you've barely even taken a class in that area. So we're fortunate to get to teach within our area, but you might think about the size of the department, what you're typically asked to teach, what the research expectations are.
Or if the teaching load is higher, if that means there isn't a different component. I mean, if you don't want to do any research at all, we had an individual who left our school for a job that was basically like a 4-4. And he didn't want to do research, so it was like actually more fitting, and he loved teaching. So, but I think beyond that, it's going to start to be real hard to hit those research expectations.
Great. And again, I'll just display all of these. So what to look for during the interview, I think just some of the things we've touched on are good questions to ask. Are there opportunities for course releases? Or, I think you can gauge how overworked the faculty feel, but I just asking them any questions you might have, or if you're nervous to do that, at least asking those questions after you have an offer. Like, do you get to teach classes within your own area? Do you get to choose? Do you have any flexibility of choosing when you teach? If people have been successful getting tenure in the department, questions about space, I think, are really critical. So when I was negotiating, I made sure that I had a dedicated sleep space that had at least 2 rooms that would be mine. So just being really clear about what your needs are. And I think some of that can come later when you're developing your request for startup funds. But looking at, is equipment shared or is it your own? Is there a lot of red tape? These are questions you might need to ask everywhere. And then, yeah, just various miscellaneous questions about, you could do summers, sabbaticals, all sorts of things that we've listed there. Okay. Some tips for you. We touched on this one, but not letting this sound like your backup, either in yours or letter writers. Treating everyone on interviews that they have a big say in determining whether they get the job, because they really might. Knowing the course offerings, just simply being prepared, knowing, for instance, like if you have any expectations over summer, or if you will be asked to teach master's students, or what that might look like. So just doing the research, any current initiatives. I think especially if you are more research focused and you have a strong research record, know that it would benefit you to also ask questions about teaching or about other initiatives, because you don't want to be seen as, oh, this is clearly going to be their backup. And then have clear answers and prior examples of how you'll involve undergraduate students in your research, and knowing who your job talk should be pitched for. It can be very different going on these types of interviews compared to R1 interviews. Are you aiming it at faculty? Will students be there? Are they evaluating this as an example of your teaching? And I think, just speaking really quickly, how do you prepare for teaching demonstrations? I think the biggest one is to try to be as prepared as possible with, and you can ask these questions ahead of time. Like, our school really values experiential learning, and we have this motto, learn by doing. So it's very common for a teaching demo to do interactive activities. So if you think that if you're looking for a job where it's primarily teaching, or that's really important, you could say, how many people might be in the room? Would it be appropriate for me to do a teaching demonstration or an activity that would take 10, 15 minutes of my time, if you want them to be able to see you in action? So I think asking those questions are important for preparing for teaching demonstrations, as well as just anything else you need about what is the level of student, who will be there, who's the audience. Yeah. And then there was another question about how to maintain an active research lab. So I think the biggest thing for us is that once you've prepared and taught the class a few times, it does take less time. Of course, you're regularly modifying, but there's really nothing like that first time as far as the intensity and the time commitment. I have spent most of my time training students how to do research. That's the part that I really love, kind of getting them excited about research projects. So for me, I tend to supervise a lot of undergraduate projects. Many of these only make it to the poster presentation stage. A lot of them are student driven. And that's something that, I really love, their excitement in that. So just as an example, like a quick snapshot, I've had 54 poster presentations at conferences over the last 9 years with students. And those have resulted in 10 papers out of the lab, and 4 other collaborative papers. And then if you want to share just a little bit.
Yeah, so I guess I actually have mentored like a lot of individual projects where I mean, many of them don't make it to the manuscript stage either, but I'm often really trying to teach skills, really trying to like help people learn like coding, like especially that, because I think that obviously can prepare you for a large variety of careers. And obviously Kelly's teaching skills too. But I meant the programming side. And so I've taken on some students that aren't necessarily directly as interested in like the research question, but are interested in like kind of developing that side. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think mentoring is like definitely one of the most rewarding parts of the job. So it's very cool seeing someone grow as you're working with them.
Great. And then lastly, and we're nearly done, I think just one piece of advice really for anyone and not admin, but not necessarily if you're considering an admin route. I was given the advice a long time ago to, if you had the capacity for service, to think about what you really enjoy, because if you start being seen as a leader in some particular area, then you might be asked to do similar things. And then rather than doing the service that you don't find interesting at all, you get to spend more of your time doing things that are more meaningful to you. So I think if you are willing to answer, or volunteer for certain things that you really like, that can lead to other stepping stones in the future. So yeah, I mainly wrote that on this slide. Consider doing service that you're interested in, because you might get a little more control once you're tenured. And then there might also be other positions, or you even can create your own sometimes. So I think just not being afraid to speak up if you see a need that you might be able to fill. And yeah, you can also, if you're specifically interested in admin positions, you might consider seeking out roles where you can manage a budget or have personnel, so that you can gain and show that you have that experience. And then I haven't done many of these, but you could consider leadership development courses, or maybe budgeting for some of that if you have, one-time funds or startup funds. But there certainly are pros and cons. So the biggest change, I think, is the loss of flexibility in your lifestyle. Though for me, it was really interesting because it was very freeing in a sense to be done at 5 and to not be expected to do any work. Whereas now and prior to my interim position, I find myself constantly, like at 11 p.m., I feel like I still need to be answering emails. So to some extent, I liked that part more than I expected to, just the 8 to 5 nature of it. But, of course, you have to think about, it's harder to do research. You have fewer teaching opportunities, but you might be able to feel like you have a bigger impact and actually have a bigger impact. So I hope that has clarified a lot of the questions. I think we at least touched on all the questions to some extent, but you might consider a PUI if you find it rewarding to work with undergrad students. You like teaching enough to potentially do it a lot. You don't have your heart set on training PhD students, or, be open to doing that more collaboratively, but not within your own lab. If you feel like you can do your research at a PUI based on space and funding and equipment, you don't mind not having the prestige of being at an R1. I think we certainly feel that and can speak to it a little bit more, but you might have a little more flexibility in location. Things are fairly competitive, but yeah, but I think it might be a little easier that way. So those are just some of the things to consider. And then if you have any questions, feel free to email us at any time. Here are just some of the pictures. I really like the neuroscience puns I painted in my office my first year. This is my first conference, and then this is what our lab looks like now with my mom and our daughter. Yeah, so thank you all so much. And if you have questions, yeah, we're happy to take them, and we can also answer emails.
Anybody?
We also can stay after
Yeah.
outside.
Questions?
Yeah.
No, we actually have the room till 4. Sorry, I booked.
I booked Zoom until 3:50, we have the room until 4. So,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
like, Zoom technically can go past that.
Got it.
So we
Okay.
have plenty of time.
Sure.
If people want to hang out, but any questions about PUI life?
Oh, I do have one question. Is that PUI offer also like two-body problem, like solve two-body?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. For anyone on Zoom, the question was about two-body problems and might it solve that. I think for us it was very helpful. We actually weren't So I started, and then 6 years later, James started. But I think we were really trying to decide, do I want to stay at Cal Poly? Am I willing to move? Is he going to apply like only to schools in California? Like, what does he really want? So it's not like we were waiting for 6 years for a position. I think once we finally decided, our department was like really eager to put a position out, although we still had, a real interview process and things like that. So
And there was a need. It wasn't necessarily just created for me. So,
yeah.
I think it probably can help, or at least knowing, like, so if there is a two-body problem that, and if one person is at an R1 nearby, it does like broaden the number of schools. And that said, I don't know if it's like, I don't know all the internals of the bureaucratic process of like if it's easier than in R1 like to make it happen, but there are a few other couples in our department, so I guess I can say that, and at the university broadly. So
Yeah, I
think of
think
it as another potential possibility if that's relevant to you.
I think it might also depend on how, like the institution and how easy it is to find other jobs in the area. So, like in a city like Los Angeles, um, where there are lots of jobs, maybe they wouldn't necessarily, or Boston, maybe they wouldn't necessarily immediately say, "Oh, we can get both of you here." At Cal Poly, we're in a pretty small city. So I think they sort of know that eventually, if this doesn't happen, it's a real retention problem. So,
It has been, like, we've seen it, like people have talked about it before, so
yeah, what I will say is very different, and this is sort of off topic, but I do think it's harder to defer a teaching focused position because so often you want to fill the classes that start in the fall, whereas we have a number of friends at research universities where almost all of them, I think, who have said, I want to start in a year, they've said, okay, no problem. But I think maybe the combination, if there are two people looking for a job and you can have like 2 potential years to search, I don't know. But yeah.
Thank you.
Good thoughts? Anybody here online? Alright, well,
Okay.
cool. We'll definitely take you up on
Great.
emails.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna snip it and just like have this chunk posted on my
Sure.
website, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful information for
Great.
a lot of people.
Great.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we can send the slides and if there are any
Yeah.
questions. Great.
Great.
Alright.
Thanks for the
All right.
question.
Yeah, thanks everyone.